CSIS 2440 is filmed before a live studio audience.
So today what we're going to be looking at is how to read a file, a text file. How to use PHP to look into a file and read the contents and then do some cool stuff with it, right? So let's just start off with the text file I've got right here, and inside the project, well, we're not in the PHP yet, in the Palindrome yet, but right here I have a folder called file stuff, and I just have the index and a text document called words, right? And so we're going to just put our favorite first phrase of a program, happy birthday. So in the PHP here, I want to read that and just spit it out. Nothing too fancy. In a few minutes we'll take this and apply it to the Palindrome, right? But the first thing you gotta do is when you're going to read a file, you need to open up a file stream, okay? So we're going to open it up and assign it to a variable. And a file stream, it's literally, however you want to look at it, a tunnel or a path or a conveyor belt is one analogy you'll hear, from this index file to this text file, right? So we're just going to open up a tunnel, and I'm going to call it FS for file stream. You can call it whatever you want. And to do it, you just use the function called fopen, all right? Now in the lecture notes today, there's a list of about, I don't know, 7 or 8 functions, and they're all related to file operations, right? And they all start with F if they're dealing with the files. And one of the little things, the few things I like about the autocomplete thing of Notepad is when you open the parenthesis here, it gives you a little hint of what you got to do. So you need to put the file name in there, and then what mode you're going to be accessing it in. And there are 3 modes, 3 main modes. There's read, append, and write. Just think of the acronym RAW, R-A-W, or WAR if you prefer, right? Whatever, read, append, and write. There's also R plus and A plus and W plus, which we'll talk about another time. But the mode we want is just read. So the file is, you saw it, it's called words.txt, and make sure you get the file path correct. And then we want to be in read mode, all right? Easy enough. So now all we've done though is just built the tunnel. We haven't sent the data through the tunnel, right? We just have a portal from index to words.txt. That's it. So the next thing up is we're going to read it, okay? And the function is fread, or freed, okay? And this, again, the little hint there, resource handle, the resource they're talking about is the tunnel, right? The file stream. The next thing is how long is it? How much do I read? And so you actually just tell it the length of the file. Well, how do you get the length of the file? There's a function for that, right? That's the answer, exactly right. There's a function for that, and the function is called file size. And we pass in words.txt. Okay, so this read function here, it takes in the file stream. That was a typo there, sorry about that. So the read function takes in the file stream and the size of the file itself that you're going to be reading. And that's just going to return the values in there. Well, I want to just echo that out basically, right? So we'll just echo that out. And now if I go to that page, refresh, it just says happy birthday, right? Okay. Well, let's go with, I want to add another thing here. I want to say, you're old. What's going to happen when I spit this out, when I refresh it now? It will say happy birthday, you're old, but it'll all be squished together, right? Now, of course, you could, inside your text file, do this, right? What's wrong with doing that, though? I mean, that'll fix the problem, right? But what's wrong with doing that? It's not a text, yeah, it's a text file. It's not an HTML file, right? Exactly right. And so that's a problem. You don't want to blend your, I mean, this text file is probably going to be ginormous, and it's going to be from somebody else that's not a programmer that just gave you a bunch of stuff and you got to read through it. And we'll see some examples of that in a minute. Okay, so there's a better way to do this, of course. Let's go back to this situation here, and we'll go back to the index file. And one thing is, right now, it's reading the entire file, right? That's what the fread function does, or the fread, however you want to pronounce it. That's what that function does. It reads the entire file. Well, you can read it a line at a time if you wanted to, right? There's a function for that. So the function is called getS, which stands for get string, okay? File get string. And if you look at the parameters it takes in, all it needs is the file path, or the file stream. That's the word I'm looking for. Doing this, however, what's going to happen is it's only going to be happy birthday, because it's looking for a string. And a string has a terminator, right? If you're familiar with Java, there's when you do a scanner, okay? And if you don't know about Java, that's fine, just ignore this. But if you do know about Java, when you do a scanner, scanner's looking for some sort of terminator, an end of line character. And so we said get the file string, right? Or get a file string. And so there's a terminator right here. So it's only going to get the first string it finds, and we just get happy birthday. Well, there's a way to fix that, which is do a loop through the entire file, and after each string, get the next string, and the next string, and the next string. So we're going to loop through until the end of the file, okay? So what kind of loop do you probably want to use for that? Yeah, exactly right. You're going to do a while loop. While what? Not the end of the file. That's exactly right. So while not end of file. That's the, file end of file, right? You got to put the F in there, right? And it's just the file stream again. And so we could get away with just this right here. We don't need the curly braces because it's a single line of code. Let's just start there. And now we get everything again. But the difference this time is it's getting them one at a time rather than all at once. So now if I wanted to, I can do this. I can just put a paragraph right before it or something like that, and then close it out at the end, because I'm getting it one line at a time. So I'm getting the first line, which is happy birthday. That's the first string, and I'm echoing the first time, and I'm concatenating the paragraph tags around it. And then when it loops again, it'll get the next phrase and so on down the line. And so now we have it on two different lines, and I can just add more. No, I'm not. And it'll just keep going, right? All right, pretty cool. This one's called file get string. That's what the S stands for. There's also file get character, which is a C. Does exactly what you think it does. File get C gets a character, just exactly what you probably think. And so what do you expect the behavior to look like now when I refresh it? H, and then new line, that right, exactly right, all the way down, right? Because it got it one character at a time. Okay, so the reason I'm showing you those two is to show you that you can get anything out of a file you want. You can get individual character at a time, or you can get the whole one line at a time. And there's another thing I'm going to show you that's where you can get it based on what's called a delimiter, okay? And so you can set it up to where you can group things in the text file, and you can grab things a piece at a time. But the point of me telling you all that is that you can get the stuff out of the file, and then using PHP, now you have it. You can do whatever you want with it, right? I mean, I could simply have just listed in this text file the names that I want to use for my navigation or something like that, and grab it out of there and make my navigation menu. That's a silly use case, but you could do that. Well, one thing you could do is this. As I mentioned, this delimiter idea, we can set this up to where we tell the code that every time there's a comma, it's a new piece of information, right? And so the comma is what's called the delimiter. It doesn't have to be a comma. It can be literally anything you want, and I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. But you've heard the term of CSV file, right? That stands for comma separated values, CSV. That's exactly what this is, okay? But in our code, we could do this. Go back to index here. We can, first of all, let's just grab this. All right, so let's comment these two guys out. And we'll go back to reading the whole file. So we'll just say, we'll make a variable that's called contents, and it's equal to reading the file and the file stream and the file size of words.txt. Okay? All right, so we have this variable called contents, and then let's just echo the variable out for a moment. Refresh, and this is back to where we were, but we have these commas in there, right? Well, I can take this and using a really cool function with a great name, explode.
Hey, what's up? Me and KG wrote the song 5 minutes ago. It's called Master Exploder.
It's a great name, I love it. And what I can do is you can explode based on the delimiter, and each thing between the delimiter is becomes a separate element in an array. So I can use the explode function to turn this into an array of size 3, where the 0th element will be happy birthday, the first element will be you're old, and the second element will be no I'm not, right? And all you do is just what you'd probably think. We'll just say, I don't know, we'll call it the words array. It's going to equal explode, and then you put the delimiter, which is a comma, and then the string, okay? Now, just for the record here, you don't have to pull this out of a file, right? If you just had some really long string that has a bunch of commas in it, you can use the explode, or whatever the delimiter you decide to choose. So now, we'll not echo that out, we will do a var dump on words, because words is now an array, right? And here we go, we refresh it, and you can see that we have an array now where the 0th element's happy birthday, and then you're old is next, and no I'm not is next. Okay? Well, now you can loop through it, right? And do whatever you want with it. Let's say, first of all, that this phrase here, no I'm not, I decided to reply back with yes. So here's the next thing. Yes, you are. Okay, this is fine, and it'll just add it to the element, that element to the array. But what if I was saying, yes, you are? Well, that's a problem, right? Because now yes is being delimited by that comma. And so you'll see that the array now says, yes is one element, and you are is another. That's no good. So we got to change the delimiter, right? And you can do this. I actually have files where I've done this very thing, where you make up some crazy delimiter that you know will never actually be part of an actual text. If I told you to send me a text file with a whole bunch of content in it, there's a possibility that there will be commas and periods and exclamation points and all these things, and so I can't use those for delimiters. So make up a delimiter, and I used this one in the past. I've used this one. Right? There's no way that's going to be part of your text. It's a little, that's cat ears or something. I don't know what that is. Yeah, maybe a happy face. There you go. So we just put that where the commas are that are not commas that are part of the sentence, right? So that's our delimiter now. And if I go in here and I just change my delimiter like that, and now we get the array that we actually want. Yes, you are, right? Okay. What if we had something like this though? Here's where it gets fun. And this, pay close attention right now, will help you with your first password validation assignment. Your password input thing that's coming up. You're going to make 3 password sites. The first one's called the insecure password site. The second one's called the not as insecure password site. And the third one's called the relatively secure password site. This will help you with the first couple of those. So let's just say, now I'm not going to do exactly what you're going to have to do on the password site, but I'm going to use the technique. So let's say we got the members here, of course, so this is our list. We now refresh, and our array is just a string here of James Hetfield Kirk because I didn't put the proper delimiter, right? So we can go back to a comma for now, that's fine. We'll just stick a comma in there and get our array, and there's our nice array with each member of the band. All right, well, what can we do with that array? Well, we can, of course, do a for each loop where we do words as word, and we can just echo word, right? And we'll just tack on a line break or something. There we go, gets a nice list of everybody there. But what if I wanted to also separate out the first and last name, right? I already broke it down using explode with the comma as a delimiter, But what if I wanted to also get the individual names? Now what? Like James as one element in the array and Hetfield as another element. Yes, you can explode it again. Exactly right. So you're going to loop through it and explode each individual component of the array. So let's just do a var dump here again. So if you look here, this is one element in the array, right? Well, I can explode James Hetfield based on the space. And now I will have a new array that's got James and Hetfield, right? And I'm doing this in the loop. So when the loop resets, then I'll be on Kirk Hammett here. And what'll end up happening is, again, I'll have a brand new array that's just got Kirk and Hammett in it, right? And we'll keep doing that. Notice I got a space here at the beginning of each of these. That's because in my text file, I have a space after that comma. So we actually want to remove that so it doesn't try to delimit on space when there's no real word there in a minute, right? So let's fix that. Okay, so in our loop now, let's just do that. We'll uncomment that out. And rather than echoing this out, let's go ahead and get some curly braces here. We can do another explode. So I can say names equals explode on space, and it's exploding word. And word in this case is James Hetfield or Kirk Hammett or whatever, okay? Then we can do a for each loop through that if we wanted to, right? So we'll just do a for each loop. We now have one, remember that we're in a for each loop already. So right now we've only got James Hetfield, and we've just exploded it into an array that's James and Hetfield, two separate things. So now we can do a for each loop through that little teeny array of two elements right here, for each names as name. And now I can echo that out, right? And let's just for clarity put some curly braces. Don't need them, but let's just do it. So echo, and maybe I'll do paragraph. So now we have them separate though. That was an individual element of an array and so forth down the line. So this idea of double exploding, you're going to need to do that in your password, one of those password assignments, okay? That'll help you with that. So the question was, is it possible to have this print out and have the word first name here and then the word last name here? And the answer is totally. But you'd have to change it from a for each loop because you have to know which element you're on to do that, right? But that's fine. We can do that real quick. We'll just do a for loop, a regular for loop. And so now in here, we'll echo out, we'll say if x is equal to 0, then we'll echo first name, like so, else echo last name, right? And then we'll just echo out the name's xth element. Does that make sense? Yep, so now it's going to, as we're looping through, it's going to be if x is 0, it'll do this, and if it's 1, because that's the only two options we're going to have, do that, and then echo out the name. So that should give us what we want, and of course, probably put some style on this. That var dump right there, clean that up. Okay, so that should give us what you're asking there. There you go, first name James, last name Hetfield, right? Those are the pros and the cons of a for each versus a regular for loop. For each loops aren't meant to just loop through it and not care about which element you're on for the most part, whereas a for loop, you can be a little bit more specific if you need to. Yeah. Okay, any questions about any of that stuff with the file, basic operations and explode? By the way, there's also a function called implode. What do you suppose that does? Yeah, it takes an array and turns it into a string, basically. Yep. And it's not based on a delimiter because it starts as an array, and then you add the delimiter, right? So you say, hey, take all these things in an array and then separate them by commas or separate them by whatevers and make them all one big string, right? We'll learn them. We'll use that function another day. But what we want to do now to apply this to our Palindrome site, and again, a friendly reminder about this Palindrome site. It's a stupid site. It's just a silly site that it's sort of my way of taking all the concepts we've learned and just cramming them into this one box of Palindrome site. And so this use case we're going to do is, it's not necessarily the most amazing thing, but it's a practical thing where you can give the user the option to enter their own palindromes or just take the default ones we have in a text file. And so that's what we're going to do. Okay. So I'm going to close all this stuff out here, and we've already got the Palindrome site open from last time we met, and we'll take a look and run it. So right now we could choose a number and you can put palindromes and it runs just fine. Okay. Oh, this is leftover from the other day. I changed something in my CSS that's causing this. Let me fix this real quick. Okay, so now this is how it works. What I want to do is go back home, and on this page I want to put a checkbox there that if they check the box, then they don't have to enter this in. And it'll just use a list, like a text file that's got palindromes in it, right? Okay. So we'll use all these, and all we really need to do here, go into our functions file, and what we're looking for right here, this line of code, line 18, it's one simple line of code. What's that line actually do? It takes this right here, it takes those three things that I entered into those fields, and it runs them through our palindrome processor, right? So rather than grabbing those three things, I want to grab the stuff in the text file. That's it. So there's a really easy way to do that. We'll just replace this line of code. We'll copy it because we're going to need it back in a little bit with a function that we're going to create. And we'll call that function, I don't know, get palindrome text file. Oh my gosh. Okay, so get the palindromes text file. So this is going to be, right now, this line 18, it's an array, right? That post is an array. And we're putting it into some variable that's an array variable called inputs. Well, instead of doing that, let's get it out of a text file. We have to write the function in a second here, but get it out of a text file, which will return an array, and the function will return an array and put it into inputs. And then it'll just ignore all of our input, right? And it'll run based on what's in the file. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. So let's just build this function right up here. There it is. And we'll scooch you over. Okay, remember, step one. Open up a file stream, right? So fopen, and this time let's actually use a variable for our file name, call it file name, and we're going to put it in read mode. And so let's make our file there, file name equals, now we have to use a different path. It's in the folder called text, and it's called palindromes.txt. Look at that, I spelled it right. So there we go, text palindromes, that's the file. And then we opened up a file stream. We made a portal between the functions file and palindromes.txt file, okay? And then we want to grab it, turn it into an array, right? And then return the array. And then that's going to end up ultimately going right there. All right, so how do we grab it? Let's look at it again. It's all comma separated. We can just simply make a variable called words, and we'll equal it to read the file and the file stream there, and file size, file name. So now I have this words, which is a string, and it's full of a bunch of stuff separated by commas. Well, all I'll have to do is explode it and return it, right? Because when I explode it, it becomes an array. Well, I can just return the exploded version of it, right? I don't have to set it to a variable. So I'm going to explode based on commas, and I'm going to explode the words string, and that's what I'll return. So that will return an array. Dig it?
Can you dig it? Can you dig it?
So we come down here, line 26, and now this is actually receiving the text file contents as an array, and it will run it on that, and it will just ignore whatever I put here. So we'll come back, we'll refresh everything, make sure we refresh here. And I still have to put a number here because of our error trapping, right? So we'll put that, we'll put dog, and I click submit, and it asks me this, and then I put something here, and when I click submit, it will ignore that and just run what was in the file, right? It's pretty cool. All right, here's a new palindrome for you. Madam in Eden, I'm Adam. Believe it or not, that's a palindrome. But what's the problem there? Yeah, there's a comma in there, darn it. So we need to make a different delimiter, right? Or we can just take the comma out, whatever. I'm not going to bother with either one, but I just wanted to point out, you have to be careful, right? If you're building a text file like this, you could run into a problem. You've already seen how to get rid of the delimiter and use a different one, just make up your own delimiter, okay? So we'll leave that one out. We'll just take out the comma for the sake of this experiment here. But all we got to do is just refresh this page and it'll reload it. Madam in Eden, I'm Adam. Who knew the garden had so many palindromes? Eve's name is also a palindrome, right? Eve. Okay, so far so good. This is pretty straightforward, but let's just say that the ultimate goal was to just use this text file. There's still some issues here. Thing number one, they got to fill this out even if we're not going to use it. That's no good, right? And what's the point of having this? So why don't we give them an option? Why don't we say, hey, you can either choose a number and enter your own, or check this checkbox to just use the default list, right? So let's make a checkbox here in our form. We'll style it up another day, right? I'll probably style it after class and it'll be in the next set of notes. But for now, we'll just put it inside of a div and we're just going to make a label for we'll call it the default, good enough name, and it's going to say use default list. All right, close out the label, and then the input is a checkbox, so type equals checkbox, and we needed to have the ID of default because that's what links this label up. When we use the for property, the value that's in there is referring to the ID of the actual thing that it's linking to, okay? And I'll show you what that does in a minute. We also want to give it a name so we can get it out of the get and the post and everything. Name equals, we'll just call it default also. And that should do it. Refresh. And now, again, we'll style it another day. But the reason we put the label on it, because you can actually click, if the label's linked up to the input, when I click on the label, it'll actually check the box, right? If it wasn't linked up, so I'll just put something else there. When I refresh, clicking on that label doesn't check the box anymore. That's a better user experience because now they don't have to focus on this little teeny square, right? So that's why that's there. Okay, but now we can check this box. So what we want to do, if it's checked, display that stuff. If it's not, don't, right? Yeah, so we're going to just modify that line of code we were just looking at here a second ago in the functions right here. And we're going to modify this. So we're just going to basically add on another little branch to this right here. Right now we're saying if the palindromes post doesn't exist, which is where you manually enter the 3 palindromes or however many. If it doesn't exist, then it's going to display the form asking you to enter them. So in other words, that's this page right here. And at the moment, the palindrome post does not exist. So because it doesn't exist, we displayed that form, right? If it does exist, then we go this route and either grab the input, which we were doing a minute ago, or get it from this text file. Okay, so let's say they check the box. They get to the palindrome page. We want to see if the box is checked, and we also, if the box is checked, we don't care if the palindrome post has happened or not. Do you agree with that? If the box was checked, we do not care if the post has happened or not. Okay, so how about we say right here, if the post is not set for palindromes and the checkbox isn't checked, right? Because if the checkbox is checked, we don't want to display the form either. So what we want to do here then is if the form has not been processed, in other words, palindrome post doesn't exist, and the default button is empty, the default checkbox is empty, right? So and that's empty. Because if that's empty, and the form hasn't been processed, then we need some input to put the palindromes in there. However, if the form hasn't been processed, but the checkbox has been checked, then we're good to go. Does that make sense? Okay, make sure our parentheses are the right amount. And here we go. Let's refresh it. Try it normal first. Looks good. Let's go back home and check it. And it should just run it without displaying the form, and it does. Good, okay. But we're not done yet.
But I'm not done yet.
I do want to give them the option to actually enter in their own palindromes, because right now, if they try to enter them in, I put 2 here. Sorry, uncheck that. And if they try to enter them in, it's not going to take those. It's just going to do this, right? That's where the else if comes in. So down here, we basically want to say, if the checkbox is checked, do this. Otherwise, do what we used to have, right? So this is easy enough, else if. And we're looking for this guy right here again. So else if that is not empty, right? If that's not empty, go ahead and do exactly that. Else, do this. I got too many curly braces there, right? That's what we used to have. That should give us what we want. Now, we still have to deal with the error trapping in a minute here. Clean this up. Okay, let's look at this one more time. If the post has not been processed on this page, right? Let me get there. On this page, if that submit button right there has not been pushed and the checkbox has not been checked, then show the form, which is exactly what's happening right now. Otherwise, else if the default is not empty, which means the checkbox was checked, then grab the stuff out of the text file, because that's what the default means. Use the text file. Otherwise, just take the input from the user. All right, that should do it. Back home, try it the normal way. And we'll put some real stuff here. And it should just run those. And it does. Madam on Madam and Beef is perfect. Come back, checkbox, fill this out. And now it doesn't matter, even though I chose 3 there, it's going to ignore that and just process the file. Okay, pretty good. Still some issues though with the error trapping, right? So we want to clean that up, but this part's working pretty well, I think. Next up, let's make, if I have this checked, but I don't choose anything here, that I won't get an error, right? Before we do that, let's just change one little tweaky thing in our error message. So in our functions down here where we display the error message, I'm going to say, choose a number of palindromes or check the default, right? So that way the error message is a little better. So in other words, if they leave it blank, they get that now, okay? All right, but what I want them to be able to do is, if that's checked and they forget to do this, that's okay, because that's irrelevant anyway, right? Now, using JavaScript, you can do this more efficiently by just checking the box and then it disables the drop-down box. You could totally do that, but my focus here is to make us think through some complicated logic. Okay, that's why we're doing this. Okay, but yeah, you could easily with JavaScript, if that's checked, this thing just disappears. Okay, all right, so here we go. What we want here is, let's look at our error trapping code, which we have a file called error trap right here. Okay, we want to, if they've checked the box, then we don't care if pal count has a value, right? Pal count's the drop-down box. Does that make sense? Okay. So right here, we're looking to see if pal count's empty. So if it's not empty, then we're setting up this error number, I think is what the EN stood for, equal to pal count. Okay. Well, however, if it is empty, then I want to check and see, well, is the palindrome box checked? Is the default box checked? Because if it is, then I don't need to increment the error code, right? That's all we got to do, just right here. Just simply say else if, and we'll look for that guy, whoa, hello, the checkbox in the post, right? So else if the post, so we're looking for that, right? So what we want here is else if that is not empty. Actually, if it is empty, right? And the reason we want to check if it's empty, the first thing here is if the pal count's not empty, okay? If it's not empty, then we just grab the pal count and we're good to go. They've chosen a number, we're fine. But if we get to this point, then that means the pal count was empty, right? So the pal count's empty and the default's empty. That's no good. That's when we want to increment, right? So that should give us what we need. That should fix the error trapping for a moment. So in other words, let's go here. If I leave it blank, same errors as usual. If I put something in here, should get the same error as usual. If I put something here, but not in the word, I should get the other error. But here's the tricky one. If I click that, but not that, and I click submit, I should just get enter a word. That's the only error message I should get. And I do, right? So it's not, doesn't care that I didn't choose that anymore, all right? Now we gotta persist that checkbox here, but let's leave that for a moment. If I put a word, dog, I did not choose a number of palindromes. That's the behavior we want, except for this error here, which I was expecting. And this error is the pal count right there, right? It's saying undefined variable on line 8 in the palindrome.php, right? So palindrome.php, right here, pal count, okay? What's going on there is in our error trap, actually, right here, pal count, okay? So this is setting the pal count to equal to the post, except it doesn't exist in this situation, right? So we need to check and see if the checkbox has been done. Now there's a couple ways around this. We can just start off by setting pal count to 0, and then it'll have a value. That's really all we need. We're just going to ignore the value. So that's probably a good down and dirty way to fix that without having to do a bunch of complicated if statements or something. So we'll just set pal count to 0. And then whatever happens here, we'll either reassign it or leave it as 0. That'll probably fix that. So let's refresh. And now we have this one. It's the search word, okay? Why is that there? Let's start over because that's probably fixed now. Okay, if I click submit, yeah, and I put a search word, it should still get an error. Choose this. And why is that happening? That's no good. Undefined variable, search word on line 8. Search word, so yeah, okay, I see what's happening. That was a tricky one. Okay, so notice here in this statement right here, search word is not empty and pal count's not empty. Well, pal count was empty, so this never ran. So we never assigned search word. So we need to add to this right here that pal count's not empty or the checkbox is not empty or something like that. I have to think through the exact logic. We got to put the checkbox in there is the point, right? So this has to be there and this has to be there or the checkbox has to be checked. So that's not empty. So we'll put a parenthesis around that. Or the default is not empty, right? So not empty. That should fix the problem here. Let me make sure my parentheses are all squared away. So we're saying the search word cannot be empty and the following must be true. Either the pal count is not empty or the default is not empty. That should give us what we're looking for. I'm pretty sure that's right. Okay, so here we go. Check that. And now we get undefined index pal count on line 7 in error trap. And, oh, yeah, okay. Again, this index is undefined because it was never set, right? So this, we're trying to assign that value to the pal count there, but we can't because it doesn't exist. So that's an error. So again, that's easy enough. We can just, if it exists, do it, right? So if is set that, then do it. Let me make sure I got my parentheses there. Otherwise, we'll do this. That's what I was trying to avoid a minute ago. Else that, okay? Dig it?
Can you dig it?
That makes sense? So again, let's just make sure we're clear here. The original problem with the search word not showing up was because this block here was saying the search word's not empty and the pal count's not empty. Well, because the pal count was empty, this never happened. Okay, but now we've said, okay, make sure the search word's not empty and at least one of those has something in it. That's basically what that's saying, right? So now we make it down here, but then we get to line 7, and line 7 is like, hey, I don't know what this pal count thing is, right? Because it never got set in the post in the previous page. So we're like, okay, if that's set, then assign it to pal count. Otherwise, assign pal count to 0. That should solve our problems there. Go back home, do it the real way first, and we'll put some in there. That's working properly. We'll check it, come in here, and it worked fine. Great, solved the problem. Now, last thing is this. Notice here when I have that checked and I forget to put a word and I click submit, it unchecks. Right? We don't want that. We want that to stay checked. Right? Just like if I choose this and I click submit, we want the 3 to stay there. Right? So we just got to put it up in the URL and grab it. Right? So in our error trap right here, we'll just come down here and we want to say if not empty, the post default, that's not empty, then we want to say the checkbox equals checked or something. Who cares what we put there? It doesn't matter. Okay? Else, checkbox is equal to false. Then we just need to add that to the URL here, right? So we'll just add a little ampersand there, CB equals whatever the value of CB is. So now that should put it in the URL. We're not done yet, but so it put checked up there. That's good, right? Now in our index here, we look for that, right? We look in the get, grab it, and maybe in our important stuff, we're going to need that. So we'll go to important stuff. And right here, we can just change this get variables thing to also return the checkbox status, right? And so we'll eventually add this, right? Checkbox, something like that. So the get variables function is here. Get variables right there, and we just have to do this business, right? Again, if not empty, get, and we call it CB, right? So we're getting this out of the get now. Then we'll say checkbox is equal to the get, EC. Otherwise, checkbox is actually equal to the Boolean value false here in this case. And the other one is just the string false, but here it'll be Boolean. All right, and then we're going to return whatever checkbox is right there, right? So that, again, this important stuff is at that, this get variables is in the important stuff file right here, and now we just passed in that value of either false or something, right? And that's at the top of this page right here. So now we have access to this checkbox thing. Well, now all you got to do is right here, if you put the word checked, that's just HTML, it's checked, right? So we just need to check that based on that value we just grabbed out of the URL. Does that make sense? So we don't want to put check there every time. So we'll open up some PHP. We'll echo out a ternary operator, close out our PHP, and right there we'll either spit out the word checked or we won't. So we're just checking to see if checkbox is not false, right? So if it's true, then we echo out checked. Otherwise, we do not. That's it. That should give us what we need. Refresh, and let's just do a regular old test. 2 palindromes. All right, so there, that seems to work okay. And we'll come back over here and we check that, and we get the proper error message. We put something in there, DAS, whatever. And notice the checkbox stayed when we got the error message, right? That's the thing we were testing. Click submit, everything works just fine. So now we fixed it, the error trapping works, and it looks in the list, or it lets you choose the ones you want to enter. Fabulous. Now you know all about reading from a file and incorporating it. Okay, now I really need to have a great week.